Gemini 3.1 Pro just dropped, and honestly, I almost ignored it. Another point release. Another decimal bump, right? But after actually using it, I found something I didn't expect. Google didn't make it faster. They made it smarter. And the difference is bigger than I thought. So in this video, I'll walk you through what Gemini 3.1 Pro actually does well, how it stacks up against the previous version, and the prompting practices that'll get you the best results. Let's start with the numbers, because they're kind of insane. What is Gemini 3.1 Pro? So Gemini 3.1 Pro is Google's latest flagship model, released February 2026. Google describes it as built for complex tasks where a simple answer isn't enough. And that framing is actually pretty accurate. It handles text, code, images, audio, and video all in a single model. We're talking true multimodality here, not a patchwork of separate tools. And it comes with a context window of just over 1 million tokens. To put that in perspective, you could feed it an entire software codebase, a 200-page document, and a video walkthrough all at once, and it holds all of that context together simultaneously. But here's where it gets interesting. The big shift with 3.1 Pro isn't the size of the window. It's what happens inside it. Google essentially built in what they call a deep think step, where the model literally pauses and reasons before it answers. Slower on the surface, yes, but dramatically more accurate on hard problems. That distinction matters a lot, and we'll see exactly why in a second. What's new versus Gemini 3 Pro? If you were already using Gemini 3 Pro, you might be thinking, do I actually need to switch? After going through the numbers, my answer is yes, and it's not even close on certain tasks. The most striking improvement is in reasoning. On ARC-AGI 2, which is basically a benchmark designed to test novel logic that models can't just memorize, Gemini 3 Pro scored 31.1%. Gemini 3.1 Pro scored 77.1%. That's more than double, and it's the highest score among frontier models right now. One tech writer described this as Google finally understanding that slowing down to think is a feature, not a bug. That framing stuck with me. On competitive coding, the jump is equally dramatic. LiveCodeBench ELO went from 2,439 to 2,087, leaping past GPT 5.2, which sits at 2,393. And on web research tasks, BrowseComp accuracy jumped from 59% to nearly 86%. That's the kind of gain that changes what's actually possible in a workflow. They also added a new medium thinking mode alongside the existing low and high settings. So now you can dial in the speed versus quality trade-off more precisely, useful if you're running high-volume API calls and don't always need maximum depth. And here's the kicker, the pricing didn't change. It's still $2 per million input tokens and $12 per million output tokens, the same as Gemini 3 Pro. You're getting a massive capability upgrade at zero additional cost. That said, it's not perfect across the board. Claude Opus 4.6 still edges ahead on certain software engineering benchmarks like SWE Bench Verified, and there's some attention decay in very long contexts if you don't structure your input carefully. Which brings me to the part I find most useful, the actual use cases. What can it actually do? This is where things get genuinely impressive. Beyond benchmark scores, Gemini 3.1 Pro enables work that was either impossible or painfully slow before. Let's start with code-generated visuals. In one of Google's demos, Gemini 3.1 Pro was given a text prompt and produced an animated SVG of a murmuration of starlings, thousands of birds flocking in real time, complete with hand tracking and generative audio. All in code, not pixels. So developers can now generate crisp, interactive visuals, icons, charts, minigames, just through a text prompt. And because the output is editable code, not a flat image, you can reuse and modify it however you need. Then there's the complex systems work. In another demo, it built a live aerospace dashboard. It configured a real ISS telemetry stream and generated an interactive UI around it. Bridging raw API documentation to a usable working prototype, with reasoning happening in the middle. That's the agentic capability really showing itself. Wait until you see this one. A marketer fed it months of customer data, plus competitor reports. Gemini 3.1 Pro came back with a full strategic content calendar. Work that would have taken 3 days got done in 45 minutes. That's not a hypothetical. That's a real documented workflow. For developers and designers, you can now drop an entire project, hundreds of files, into the context window and ask for a high-level audit. One developer reported it found hidden dependencies and suggested refactors that would have taken days to identify manually. And in multimodal analysis, users have been feeding it a competitor's website screenshot, plus the HTML code, plus their own product info, and asking Gemini to identify weaknesses and rewrite their positioning. It can see both the visual design and the text, reason across both simultaneously, and hand you back actionable output. Performance highlights. Let me give you a quick snapshot of where it actually ranks, because the numbers paint a clear picture. On ARC-AGI 2 reasoning, it scored 77.1%, highest among frontier models. On GPQA Diamond, which tests graduate-level science knowledge, it hit 94.3%. On MCP Atlas, which measures multi-step tool coordination in agentic workflows, it led all tested models at 69.2%. And on Apex Agents, it scored 33.5% versus 18.4% for Gemini 3 Pro, nearly double. In total, Digital Applied tracked 18 benchmark categories, and Gemini 3.1 Pro ranked number 1 in 12 of them. Its biggest advantages are in novel reasoning, competitive coding, and complex agentic tasks. And it's doing this at a price point that undercuts competitors charging 6 to 7 times more per token for comparable performance. Best practices. Okay, so you have access to this thing. How do you actually get the most out of it? I want to share the practices that made the biggest difference based on both Google's own documentation and real-world usage. First, be explicit and structured in your prompts. Define the role, the task, and the output format up front. Something like, you are a helpful coding assistant. First outline your plan step by step, then write the code. The model responds dramatically better when it has a clear structure to follow. Use markdown headers to separate your instructions from your context. It genuinely helps. The second thing, and this is the big one, use thinking and planning instructions. Google's own prompt guides explicitly recommend asking the model to plan before answering. A template that works really well. Start with plan. Analyze and outline the problem. Then execute, carry out the plan. Then validate. Check the output against the original task. This activates the deep think capability and gets you noticeably more coherent answers on complex problems. Third, structure your long inputs carefully. Just because you can dump 1 million tokens in doesn't mean you should. Include a brief summary or table of contents at the top. Label each section. And put your key instructions at both the beginning and the end, because attention does decay in the middle of huge contexts. One developer found that clearly ordering files and summarizing the project up front dramatically improved output quality. Don't sleep on this. Fourth, add a verification step. No model is perfectly factual. End your prompt with something like, flag any statements you are not 90% confident in. In one real example, a content marketer caught an outdated competitor pricing claim only because they'd asked Gemini to flag its uncertainties. It's a simple habit that saves you from publishing something wrong. Fifth, pick one workflow at a time. The best advice I've seen, identify the workflow where you currently waste the most time and test Gemini 3.1 Pro there first. Don't try to overhaul everything at once. Get a win, measure the time saved, and expand from there. And lastly, Choose the right interface for what you're doing. For experimentation, the Gemini app or AI Studio is great. You get a chat interface, live token counting, and easy prompt editing. For production or automation, use the API via Vertex AI or the open-source Gemini CLI, which lets you pipe files directly from your terminal. If you're building agentic workflows, look at the Custom Tools endpoint. It's specifically optimized to prioritize your own tools in a session. Gemini 3.1. Pro is genuinely the strongest general-purpose AI model available right now for most tasks. And the fact that it costs the same as its predecessor makes it a pretty easy decision if you're already in the Google ecosystem. The key takeaway is this: it's not faster, it's deeper. And if you prompt it to actually use that depth, with structure, with planning instructions, with verification steps, you'll get outputs that feel like they came from a much more expensive tool. If you found this useful, drop a comment below with the workflow you're planning to test it on first. I'm genuinely curious. And if you want a deep dive on any one of these use cases, the agentic workflows, the multimodal analysis, the coding benchmarks, let me know and I'll make that next.